Tell me why you decided to spend this chapter of your career in hospitality. You have such a diverse background. You've worked all over the world. You've lived all over the world. And you most recently you spent most of your career working outside of hospitality. Why take this job in hospitality?
Yeah. So there was a series of things that kind of led me to this. I'd say the first was, beginning part of my career was all pretty large companies. So I came to New York, I worked in investment banking, then I worked at Time Warner, then went to Time Warner Cable and had a great experience there. I was part of the team that kind of took that company public. We spun it off from Time Warner. Had a variety of roles, and then we ultimately sold the company to Charter in, I guess, 2014, 2015. And at that time, I was really looking for kind of more of a startup kind of growth type of company. And so I was honestly less focused on the industry and more focused on I had been at these large companies. I really enjoyed the experience. It was great. But I sort of felt like I wanted to be able to just sort of build something a bit more, be involved in the creation of something. So I actually talked to a variety of companies at that time, and got introduced to Adam at WeWork. It was still pretty small then. It was 200 people and 10 or 12 buildings, whatever it was. And it was just, wow, this is great. This is definitely not going to be a typical corporate experience, and it was not. And so, I saw kind of how, both lessons that were very positive and, sort of things not to do of how do you scale a physical business. And WeWork wasn't traditional hospitality, obviously, but there was a big piece of it of, okay, how do we take grow physically in different cities, different countries? How do we bring a human element to something that hadn't had as much of a human element before, the office space? How do you combine technology with real estate? And so thinking through all of those things, then I went over to Asia for 3 years with WeWork, came back, and actually through one of the early investors, a guy, we ran into each other again. We had worked together at Salomon Brothers very early on and said, hey, I'm invested in this company called Minthouse. You should meet the founder. He's great. And so I just got to know them, and the role wasn't right at the time, but I was really fascinated by this idea of, how do you take what's traditional residential hospitality, right? This idea, like, it was kind of mixing together a whole bunch of things, right? This experience people wanted of something like an Airbnb, right? Sort of, when I travel, I don't necessarily want to have just a traditional hotel room. I want access to a kitchen. I want to be able to, wash or dry, or I want it to feel more like I'm living in the city than I'm just a tourist there. But, with Airbnb comes a huge amount of inconsistency. As I always say, like, the best experience I've ever had staying somewhere is an Airbnb, and the worst experience I've ever had. Like, literally, we were driving up to this home we had rented with the family, and the lady calls and she's like, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you, my son lives in the basement." And you're like, "What are you I'm bringing my family," and you're on the road, you're 3 hours into the drive, and so that's just like difficult for people to deal with. And so this was like, well, look, it's all of those things that are great about what people want to stay, but it's a consistent experience. It's, it's branded. There's, someone there to take care of things when you need, what you're getting. That's such a cool concept. Again, the role wasn't right at the time, but I stayed in touch with Will. I then went to a supply chain technology company that was sort of in the middle of all of the supply chain issues, like solving super interesting problems. But then, Will called me about, a year ago and said, "Hey, look, we're looking to bring in someone to be CEO here. I think you'd be great." I talked to the board, and it really had just sort of been turning in my head of like this kind of really interesting model of how you bring together kind of real estate, traditional multifamily real estate, hospitality, these huge trends in the world that people, really want a different type of experience, first of all, when they travel, but also just even in their own city, right? You need the space on a short-term, long-term basis. So it all kind of came together. I just said, look, this is a really fascinating thing. I love a lot of stuff about it: technology, real estate, hospitality, and here we are.
Here we are. I want to touch on a few elements of that. Going back to your WeWork experience, you had a whole range of experiences there. Let's focus on some of the positive lessons you took away, because I'm very interested in how are humans gathering and socializing and moving, especially people moving between cities. What are some of the learnings that you had during your time at WeWork around that?
A couple of things. There's the consistency with an authentic local experience. So, we built spaces so that they kind of, they had a similar set of things, right? You had meeting rooms, you had breakout rooms, you had your dedicated office. There was all these things. There was a community manager there who was going to make the experience great for you, there to help out if you have questions or problems. But we also made them of the city or of the country they were in, right? And so they all had, local artists who were involved. They all had whatever the local needs were. I mean, silly things like, tea in certain places versus coffee, or, different types of events that would be more relevant in different types of cities or countries, whatever it happened to be. And so really that mix of how do you make something that's consistent, that has sort of a set of standards associated with it, but also is very local and authentic to the place that it is. And I think that's been one of the things that we think a lot about at Mint House. I always talk about, we don't necessarily have to have a set of colors that we use everywhere, or the same chair that we use in every single, you don't have to be able to open your eyes in a room and say, I'm in a Mint House. What you should do, though, is know that there's a certain set of expectations. When you come to a Mint House, I'm going to have, a kitchen and a washer dryer. I'm going to have the functionality of all these things. It's going to be, a somewhat elevated premium experience, right? I'm going to have the comforts of home, but the consistency of a hotel. And so there's some level of consistency, but we're not trying to make every room look exactly the same, right? We're trying to have it be of the city that it's in, right? Reflective of the building it's in. There's a language of cities and buildings that we want reflected when you stay. So again, it feels like you're staying in DC or New York or Nashville or someplace else, with still a consistency to it that I think makes that experience better.
That's helpful. And we were a customer, and I feel this myself. I'm based in San Francisco. You typically work out of locations there, but I'm here in New York. I was actually working for a place a couple blocks away from here. Felt very New York. Or I'm in London. I feel like, especially traveling for business, there's a certain amount of consistency because you're there to do things, and you, especially in the business travel, you almost need the background to kind of fade into the background. So it's all about the purpose of the travel, and it's knowing your customer, right? You also mentioned talking with the board. You have a great board here at Mint House. And I'm curious, as somebody coming from outside of hospitality, you're considering the job here, you're talking to the board. What stood out to you in those conversations with the board about how they were thinking about hospitality? Yeah,
so I want to go back to one thing you said, that it is a great board, and that is definitively true. It's one of the best boards I've ever worked with. And it's a really interesting mix because it's a growth company that has venture investors in it. So there are venture investors on the board. At the same time, the board has been very intentional about bringing in people who have deep hospitality and operational expertise. So the former CEO of Four Seasons is on our board. The former COO of Equinox is on our board. And so we have these people who have investment kind of growth experience. How do you scale something? What are the lessons you can use to, provide leverage to get scale as we grow the organization, right? The goal is to expand the brand into more cities and across the country. At the same time, we have a, deep set of operational expertise of this is what Four Seasons did. This is how we scaled. These are the way we looked at the problems. This is what Equinox thought about. I mean, Equinox is such a great story, right? Of taking sort of, something that people used to pay $50 a month for, and now they pay $300 a month for it because it's an elevated experience. It's the same treadmill and the same, weights, but it's everything around it that makes it so cool, makes it so welcoming. It's the hospitality piece, bringing kind of hospitality to a gym experience, which no one had really done at scale before Equinox. And so just talking to all of them is so exciting because I get to bounce ideas off of, okay, where do we invest? How do we grow? At the same time, how do we think about what our brand should stand for? How do we think about how do we have consistency but still be local in the markets we're in? And so all of that, we were just very much aligned on the things that were possible for this type of brand going forward. And so that was just super interesting.
I love it. I feel like in hospitality, at least, there's not really a lot of conversation around the board makeup and even where you decide to take capital, right? And those are huge drivers in terms of what you're able to do. So it's cool to hear that. You touched on this a little bit early in our conversation, but I want to come back to Mint House. I'd love to talk about the product a little bit more if we could. and then also about the business model, and
Yeah.
because there's some really interesting aspects. Maybe let's talk first about the product. And so you're referencing some elements of this, but maybe let's spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit more about what you have and how you create properties.
Yeah, for sure. At the core, we are working with multifamily residential owners in urban markets. Right? That's kind of what we do. And we've been pretty focused on that, and we plan to stay pretty focused on that. And there's others who have taken a more diffuse approach to kind of going after short-term rental, but we're saying we're multifamily, residential in urban markets, and that's the sort of consistency of what you should expect. So from there, we think that over years of experience that there's some level of scale required to make this work. Scale in a building, scale in a city. So kind of a minimum of 20 to 30 units. The building we're in right now, 70 Pine, we have 165 units here that we manage as dedicated Mint House, and so, but that level of scale. And so when you're now, and there's differences between different buildings. If we have 20 units in a building, there may not be 24/7 staff there, but there'll be someone in the building who's available. Certainly during working hours. There's a cleaning staff who helps either on a part-time or full-time basis. And so there's an operating model piece to it. Others are 24/7, sort of like a typical hotel. But then when you get to the room, again, it should feel like a home. You have, it's an elevated design. We're not kind of competing against sort of the most luxury, Amman or, $30,000 a night, as the New York Post, talked about, in the latest article there. But it is premium. It is an elevated experience. And again, it has all of those features that you want. So if you're there for a night or 3 or 4 nights and maybe you're working, hey, you don't want to go out to dinner every single night, or maybe you want to make your own breakfast one day. You can do that because you have that. You don't want to bring all your clothes. You have a washer dryer. Maybe you're traveling with kids. You have all of that there. You need to do a work, from home for part of the day. So you have a desk. You have at least someplace you can work from. And so there's all this sort of functionality that comes together in it that makes it sort of like a great place to stay, but also just a great place to be. And so, as all of that comes together, it's sort of that holistic Mint House experience.
Tell me a little bit about who your ideal customer is and the problem that you're looking to solve for them.
Yeah. So I think of it in kind of 3 big buckets. So the first is kind of the traditional, leisure travel person, right? And so whether that's Nashville, where we have sort of families coming in, or bachelorette parties. We're opening up in Washington, D.C. Lots of families coming there. It's very close to the White House, our location, and so families coming in to see it. And so there's a huge market where it's like, look, they need the functionality, as I said, kind of that home, of that Airbnb style place to stay, but they want the consistency of knowing what they're getting when they come in the door, right? So they need all this functionality. They want that elevated experience, but it needs to be consistent. So that's a big market for us. The other is corporate. And so, what we're seeing now is, first of all, a sort of significant return to business travel. But one of the big differences is people are generally going for a bit longer now, right? Where it used to be just kind of get in and out and I'm back home. Now with remote work, maybe distributed work teams, someone's saying, hey, I'm going to come down, but I'm going to come down for 3 or 4 days because I haven't seen that team in a long time. And so I'm going to go down, we'll spend a couple of days of sort of, bringing people in from parts of the country. And so that almost creates a different type of solution that you need from the place you're staying, right? Again, maybe you're going to sort of want to make your own meal. Maybe you want to have people come over and hang out in your living room, and so you have a separate bedroom and a living room, so it's not so awkward to come into a hotel room. Maybe you sort of have these different needs that you have when you're coming and staying for a longer period of time. We have event spaces in many of our hotels, so you can host it there, have people stay directly on property. And then the third big bucket is what I'd call sort of the other. And this is a super interesting category. It's one of the big things kind of starting in COVID and even after was traveling nurses, right? So they want to be able to go to, or they go to different cities. They need a place to stay, but again, they want that feeling of home, but the consistency. There's a big bucket I'd call change of life. So one of the things is people who've recently gotten divorced and they need to move out quickly. They don't want to go sign a 12-month lease, but they also don't want to move into someone else's, home. And it's sort of, so this can feel like your home, but it's not the sort of long-term commitment that you need to make. Maybe you're buying a home and you just sold your other home and there's a space in between. Maybe something happened and there's a flood in your basement, right? So there's this sort of big, even for people in a city, it's this great short-term solution that is, again, consistent and elevated, but doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. And so you have sort of a variety of these use cases in what I'd call the other that are pretty interesting. And so the way I think about bringing all of this together is, again, I'll just use Nashville because it's a market we're expanding in a lot, right? So you've got Amazon, you've got healthcare companies there. They're coming in during the week. You've got people visiting for the Country Music Hall of Fame, the bachelorette parties, whatever it is, on the weekends. And then you have this base of people who are there for a long-term basis. And we think about building that portfolio within the different buildings that we have.
It's interesting to hear about those different lines of business, and I feel like I have been, for most of my life, a pretty diehard traditional hotel fan. But I've noticed over the past couple of years myself evolving kind of in the directions. I've been here in New York for a week and with my wife, and she has an office. I'm working out of WeWork, and we have space to work. But there's some days, even though this is got to be the capital of the world in terms of restaurants and things like that, sometimes you just want to try making a breakfast for yourself or something like that, right?
Totally.
And or you want to take a meeting or something. And so it's interesting to kind of feel this personally, but also some of the sort of meta trends happening around how people want to live and move around cities, and we're so connected and we're so global. There's a big opportunity, it feels.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, you don't want to make your own experience kind of, applicable to everyone, but for us, so I've got, 14 and 12-year-old boys, definitely now, but even earlier, when we travel, just going to a traditional hotel is difficult because, again, they get stuff all over their clothes and I got to clean it all the time. And, maybe we don't want to go down and spend, $50 on the hotel buffet and we just want to cook some breakfast. My boys actually both love to cook, right? And so it's like sometimes we want to go out for meals, but sometimes we've had a long day of doing whatever it is, sightseeing, skiing, whatever we happen to be. And it's like, look, we just want to come home and cook a meal and just hang out and chill for a little bit. Maybe everyone wants to go back to their own room and not all be crammed into one hotel room. And so those types of things, I just think, make it so much easier to travel, whether it's just, with your partner, whether it's with your family, even just by yourself. Having that optionality is huge.
So the other thing that's interesting to me is I am very interested in these sort of innovative product types within hospitality. I think I do approach them with a little bit of skepticism, just in the sense that I've spent most of my career in technology and I am intrigued by a technology forward experience, but I'm also curious, how do you retain the human element? And actually just walked up to the front desk a few minutes ago. 2 very warm individuals, got to chatting with them. And so I felt welcomed as a human walking through the doors.
Yeah.
And then you also have the product here that you've explained that is interesting. And that is reflected in some phenomenal guest reviews. If you look at across your review site of choice, it's clear people like this. I want to talk about a different audience. I want to talk about, what is the pitch to owners or developers or people with the real estate. Obviously, multifamily has been a darling in the commercial real estate, investment community over the past couple of years through COVID. Yep. It's a very strong product or a very strong asset class. Why? What's the case for turning it into a hospitality concept, into a mint house? Yeah,
so great. I'll just touch on the first point quickly because I think it's kind of core to what we do, and then I'll talk about the multifamily piece. That is very intentional for Mint House. So we don't think that, there's different people want different things, and we need to be able to respond to that. And so we have built the technology that allows you to do self-check-in. You can kind of do everything on your phone. If you want to just come in, go straight to your room, not talk to anyone, you can do that, right? That is all exists. It's there. We actually allow you to order, what we call stock your stays. So have, some groceries brought to your room that can be there waiting for you. Maybe you want a glass of wine. Maybe you want your favorite bottled water, whatever it is. You can do that in a totally touchless, technology-driven way. But we also have a call center that if you have a question, you can call. We also have people at the property that are available. And so because we have so much technology that helps us to run efficiently and do things the way you want to do it, but we also then can invest to make sure that there's still that hospitality piece to it. There's still someone there. And so that's really core to what we do, and it's something we think is very important. And it's why we think it's important to have scale in buildings. So that leads me to the second question of, multifamily, right? How do we talk to those landlords? How do we, convince people that this is a good use of their space? So the first is, when you look at it, multifamily has been a great asset, right? As you say, right? These 12-month leases. The truth is, right now, there's been a lot of multifamilies delivered, especially in kind of different, sort of COVID markets, whether that's Nashville or Texas, or just kind of go wherever you want to be. And the rents had everyone had been kind of projecting this, and now you're starting for the first time to see them flatline a little bit, or maybe even go down. At the same time, you still see hotel prices quite high. And because hotel had been a bit out of favor, there hasn't been a lot of development in hotels, right? So you sort of have the same kind of group of hotels that are there. I mean, again, they're the same room types, they're the same stuff, some of which are lovely, some of which, you want a different experience. So as we go in, we say, look, just the pure math of it. When you look at what we can generate on a per night basis from that group of the sort of three big groups that I've talked about, right? That long-term base, the corporate travel, the transient, more leisure type guest, you can just generate a lot more on a per night basis on, from hospitality than you can from a multifamily. And even when you take into account, the cleaning and whatever, because we're so technology enabled, we can run this and generate higher net operating income for the multifamily owner than they can on their own. And you say to yourself, okay, well, why couldn't they just do it by listing on Airbnb? And the reality is it's a pretty complex operational business, right? There's a whole bunch of distribution you have to be on, right? You have to be on every OTA, you have to be on Airbnb, VRBO, all the platforms. You also need some direct sales force, right? We're sort of talking directly to Amazon, to Jane Street, to all these different companies about their needs. They need interns, they need corporate travel, they have meetings, they have events. So we're bringing that together with a national sales force. Then you have to be able to bill for it, market it, the technology piece. All of those things come together. And what we sort of tell owners is, look, we can bring that all to you. We'll do it on a management agreement. And so, we'll take an X% fee off the top, X% fee off the bottom. We'll manage all of this. And it sort of looks very much like a hotel management agreement, but in multifamily. And what they see is that when they sort of, the cash that gets flowed to them is sort of generating a higher NOI than they can just on multifamily, especially in an environment where rents are flatlining a little bit.
I love it. And I feel this is going to be really, really interesting to watch. You talked about Equinox expanding share of wallet. I'm very fascinated by fresh creative concepts like you're building, doing the same in hospitality, right? And maybe unlocking new segments of people that haven't traditionally stayed at a hotel, right? And creating new opportunities. You talk about the operational complexity of the business, and we could get into the details of that. But I feel like what is unique among other hospitality leaders that you're bringing to the table is running major business units and then companies outside of hospitality. And it seems that a constant thread there has been how you think about corporate strategy and where you take the company. My question for you is, what capabilities are you developing organizationally that you think are different from other hospitality brands that is giving you an edge today and will in the future?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say, putting myself aside for a second, when I got here, one of the things that's so great about Mintos is how motivated and passionate the team is. And so many of the employees that we have, like at the property level, kind of who work at a market level or more nationally, come from hospitality, right? So they've been part of this industry for 20, 30 years, and they all recognize, again, the value and the benefits of it, but all the things that can be better. And so there's this real passion. If you go talk kind of, to our employees downstairs, if you talk to, you go travel different markets and just talk to them and say, what's it like working at Mintos? What are you excited about? You get all sorts of different answers, but you'll see passion. You'll see this idea that, look, there is this sort of whole new way of providing this hospitality service, right? This sort of whole new model, and people love it. They get excited about the NPS scores. They get excited about the guest experience being so amazing when people coming in. And so you then look at traditional hospitality, and the attrition rates are so high. It's so hard to keep anyone. It's so hard to attract people. And again, the reality is, because we have this, because our guests are excited, because we're excited, our investors are excited, because of the different experience that we're offering, all of our employees are really excited about this. And I think that's something that's just sort of like foundationally different, right? That level of excitement is palpable. If you're a guest, if you're a landlord, whatever it is, you sort of sense that and feel that. So that had nothing to do with me. That was just like, hey, this new idea, I want to be a part of that. They're coming here for a very specific reason. From there, then we can start to talk about, okay, look, what's different about us than maybe another short-term rental operator or sort of other companies in the space? Again, we've been focused on this premium multifamily, so we know where we're going. We know what types of buildings work for us. We're going deeper into the markets that are working well. And, I think our employees understand that we're building something here that can really scale over time. And so that focus is also important, that ability to, have a clear sense of, okay, who's coming into the space, how are we working with landlord partners, right? That engagement's also very interesting. And so I think those things have been very helpful for how we have sort of both engaged our employee base and how that translates to the guest experience itself.
I love it. I think one of the things that caught my attention that you and your team have done was the Mint Pass, and so we could talk about that, or we could talk about just broadly. I'm very curious how you're looking at expanding either share of wallet or unlocking new segments of people to become customers of yours that maybe traditionally haven't been hotel customers.
Yeah, so we can talk about both. I'd say on the second one. One of the things that I've really seen for us is, and we were talking a bit about this, before we sat down, was, I don't know if you listen to Scott Galloway at all, Prof. G. Prod, his whole rant, which I, very much agree with, that, Google is a big tax on every business, right? And so all the hospitality companies are spending however many tens of millions of dollars just sort of like getting to a baseline, paying Google for, whatever search rank, right? What's clear is we're not going to win that war, right? We don't have what Hilton or Marriott spend on performance marketing is like bigger than our entire company. So we're not going to win a war of spending the most on Google AdWords, right? So we're not going to attract people that way. So how do we get people? Well, number one, I always say our best marketing tool is the buildings themselves, right? So whatever channel we're getting people in, get them into the building. So many people are like, I never knew this existed. I've never seen this. The repeat rates are really high because once you've tried it, you're like, this is awesome. It's basically the same price as a hotel, but like a much better value. This is incredible. It's beautiful. It's elevated. It's all of those things. And then the other thing is that our product is so valuable because of the functionality of it, right? Again, it's that elevated design. We try to like have personalization through technology, but again, I can travel with my family. I have access to all these things. I can be there for work and be sort of doing some work there as well as whatever I need to do in the office. And so that sort of elevated functionality is super important. And so video is super important for us, right? How do we show people, not tell them, right? No matter how much you and I talk about this, like I can explain all of the things, but if I can just show you like a 30-second video of like, this is what you can do in a Mintos, you're like, I get it, right? And so like, how do we create that kind of organic, social video experience to say, like, this is what it is. This is how you can use it. And I think we're just starting to do that. And I think that'll have a huge impact.